Oh, goodness. Ah. Good evening, everyone. Let me just fix this. There's no music currently, as you can hear. Facebook, oh Facebook, why are you doing this to me? Facebook has made some changes, and it's a bit more difficult right now to switch from one profile to the other. And while I was switching, the music got off. All right, let me just fix this. Hello, is anyone there? Well, while no one's there, I'm gonna do what I do best. Oh, what is best? Let me just put everything fire. All right. I hope you're all doing well, wherever you are. Let me just see. All right, that's better. So, hi, good evening. If you're joining us for the first time, my name is Saman Giraud and I'll be your host this evening. Me and my colleague Joanna, who's a director, a very successful one actually, for theatre, for stage plays, as you say in the UK, right? We started reading the original 1001 Nights stories, translated by Sir Richard Francis Burton, last year in March during the first lockdown when the pandemic started. And we are currently at book number 5, at volume number 5, and at the 362nd night. I'm not really good at maths, so I don't really know how many nights are left, but we're at more than a third. So I'm going to start reading for you. It's a very nice story about a very persistent young prince. Enjoy the reading. Oh, I'm at the wrong page. It's the 359th night, I'm sorry. Okay. Now when it was the 359th night, she said, "It hath reached me, auspicious king, that quoth the king's son to himself, I may not do better than pass the night by my horse, and as soon as day shall dawn, I will mount and ride away." However, as he tarried talking to himself, he espied a light within the palace, and making towards it, found that it came from a candle that stood before a door of the harem, at the head of a sleeping eunuch, as he were one of the Ifrits of Solomon, or a tribesman of the jinn, longer than a lumber, and broader than a bench. He lay before the door, with the pommel of his sword gleaming in the flame of the candle, and at his head was a bag of leather hanging from a column of granite. When the prince saw this, he was affrighted and said, "I crave help from Allah the Supreme, O mine Holy One, even as thou hast already delivered me from destruction. So vouchsafe me strength to quit myself of the adventure of this palace." So saying, he put out his hand to the budget, and taking it, carried it aside and opened it, and found in it food of the best. He ate his fill and refreshed himself and drank water, after which he hung up the provision bag in its place, and drawing the eunuch's sword from its sheath, took it, whilst the slave slept on, knowing not whence destiny should come to him. Then the prince fared forwards into the palace, and ceased not till he came to a second door, with a curtain drawn before it. So he raised the curtain, and behold, on entering he saw a couch of the whitest ivory, inlaid with pearls and jacinths and jewels, and 4 slave girls sleeping about it. He went up to the couch to see what was thereon, and found a young lady lying asleep, chemised with her hair as she were the full moon rising over the eastern horizon, with flower white brow and shining hair parting, and cheeks like blood red anemones, and dainty moles thereon. He was amazed at her as she lay in her beauty and loveliness, her symmetry and grace, and he recked no more of death. So he went up to her, trembling in every nerve and shuddering with pleasure, kissed her on the right cheek. Whereupon she awoke forthright and opened her eyes, and seeing the prince standing at her head, said to him, "Who art thou, and whence comest thou?" Quoth he, "I am thy slave, and thy lover." Asked she, "And who brought thee hither?" And he answered, "My lord and my fortune." Then said Shams al-Nahar, for such was her name, "Haply thou art he who demanded me yesterday of my father in marriage, and he rejected thee, pretending that thou wast foul of favour. By Allah, my sire lied in his throat when he spoke this thing, for thou art not other than beautiful." Now the son of the king of Hind had sought her in marriage, but her father had rejected him, for that he was ugly and uncouth, and she thought the prince was he. So when she saw his beauty and grace, for indeed he was like the radiant moon, the syntheism of love got hold of her heart, as it were a flaming fire, and they fell to talk and converse. Suddenly her waiting women awoke, and seeing the prince with their mistress, said to her, "O my lady, who is this with thee?" Quoth she, "I know not. I found him sitting by me when I woke up. Haply 'tis he who seeketh me in marriage of my sire." Quoth they, "O my lady, by Allah the All-Father, this is not he who seeketh thee in marriage, for he is hideous, and this man is handsome and high of degree. Indeed, the other is not fit to be his servant." Then the handmaidens went out to the eunuch, and finding him slumbering, awoke him, and he started up in alarm. Said they, "How happeth it that thou art on guard at the palace, and yet men come in to us whilst we are asleep?" When the eunuch heard this, he sprang in haste to his sword, but found it not, and fear took him and trembling. Then he went in, confounded, to his mistress, and seeing the prince sitting at talk with her, said to him, "O my lord, art thou a man or a jinni?" Replied the prince, "Woe to thee, O unluckiest of slaves! How darest thou, even the sons of the royal Khosrows, with one of the unbelieving Satans?" And he was as a raging lion, that he took the sword in his hand and said to the slave, I am the king's son-in-law, and he hath married me to his daughter and bidden me go in to her. And when the eunuch heard these words, he replied, O my lord, if thou be indeed of kind a man as thou avouchest, she is fit for none but for thee, and thou art worthier of her than any other. Thereupon the eunuch ran to the king, shrieking loud and rending his raiment and having dust upon his head. And when the king heard his outcry, he said to him, What hath befallen thee? Speak quickly and be brief, for thou hast fluttered my heart. Answered the eunuch, O king, come to thy daughter's succour, for a devil of the jinn, in the likeness of a king's son, hath got possession of her. So up and at him. When the king heard this, he thought to kill him, and said, How camest thou to be careless of my daughter, and let this demon come at her? Then he betook himself to the prince's palace, where he found her slave women standing to await him, and asked them, What is come to my daughter? O king, answered they, slumber overcame us, and when we awoke, we found a young man sitting upon her couch in talk with her, as he were the full moon. Never saw we aught fairer of favour than he. So we questioned him of his case, and he declared that thou hadst given him thy daughter in marriage. More than this we know not, nor do we know if he be a man or a jinni. But he is modest and well-bred, and doth nothing unseemly or which leadeth to disgrace. Now when the king heard these words, his wrath cooled, and he raised the curtain little by little, and looking in, saw sitting at talk with his daughter a prince of the goodliest, with a face like the full moon for sheen. At this sight he could not contain himself of his jealousy for his daughter's honour, and putting aside the curtain, rushed in upon them, drawn sword in hand, like a furious ghoul. Now when the prince saw him, he asked the princess, Is this thy sire? And she answered, Yes. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now when it was the 360th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the prince saw the king rushing in upon them, drawn sword in hand, like a furious ghoul, he asked the princess, Is this thy sire? And she answered, Yes. Whereupon he sprang to his feet, and seizing his sword, cried out at the king with so terrible a cry that he was confounded. Then the youth would have fallen on him with the sword. But the king, seeing that the prince was doughtier than he, sheathed his scimitar and stood till the young man came up to him, when he accosted him courteously and said to him, O youth, art thou a man or a jinni? Quoth the prince, Did I not respect thy right as mine host, and thy daughter's honour, I would spill thy blood. How darest thou fellow me with devils? Me, that am a prince of the sons of the royal Giraud, who, had they wished to take thy kingdom, could shake thee like an earthquake from thy glory and thy dominions, and spoil thee of all thy possessions? Now when the king heard these words, he was confounded with awe and bodily fear of him, and rejoined, If thou indeed be of the sons of the kings, as thou pretendest, how cometh it that thou enterest my palace without my permission, and smirchest mine honour, making thy way to my daughter, and feigning that thou art her husband, and claiming that I have given her to thee to wife, I that have slain kings and kings' sons, who sought her of me in marriage? And now, who shall save thee from my might and majesty, when, if I cried out to my slaves and servants, and bade them put thee to the vilest of deaths, they would slay thee forthright? Who shall deliver thee out of my hand? When the prince heard these words, his speech of the king's, he answered, Verily, I wonder at thee, and at the shortness and denseness of thy wit. Say me, canst covet for thy daughter a maid comelier than myself? And hast ever seen a stouter-hearted man, or one better fitted for a sultan, or a more glorious in rank and dominion than I? Rejoined the king, Nay, by Allah, but I would have had thee, O youth, act after the custom of kings, and demand her from me to wife before witnesses, that I might have married her to thee publicly. And now, even were I to marry her to thee privily, yet hast thou dishonoured me in person. Rejoined the prince, Thou sayest sooth, O king. But if thou summon thy slaves and thy soldiers, and they fall upon me and slay me, as thou pretendest, thou wouldst but publish thine own disgrace. And the folk would be divided between belief in thee and disbelief in thee. Wherefore, O king, thou wilt do well, meseemeth, to turn from this thought to that which I shall counsel thee. Quoth the king, Let me hear what thou hast to advise. And quoth the prince, Let me hear, no, what I have to propose to thee is this. Either do thou meet me in combat singular, I and thou, and he who slayeth his adversary shall be held the worthier and having a better title to the kingdom. Or else, let me be this night, and when as dawns the morn, draw out against me thy horsemen and footmen and servants. But first, tell me the number. Said the king, They are 40,000 horse, besides my own slaves and their followers, who are the like of them in number. Thereupon said the prince, When the day shall break, do thou array them against me, and say to them. And Shahrazad pursued the dawn of day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now when it was the 361st night, she continued, It hath reached me, auspicious king, that quoth the prince, my God, that quoth the prince, When day shall break, do thou array them against me, and say to them, This man is a suitor to me for my daughter's hand, on condition that he shall do battle single-handed against you all. For he pretendeth that he will overcome you, and put you to the rout. And indeed that ye cannot prevail against him. After which, leave me to do battle with them. If they slay me, then is thy secret the surer guarded, and thine honour the better warded. And if I overcome them, and see their backs, then is it the like of me a king should covet to his son-in-law. So the king approved of his opinion and accepted his proposition, despite his awe at the boldness of his speech and amaze at the pretensions of the prince to meet in fight his whole host such as he had described it to him, being at heart assured that he would perish in the fray, and so he should be quit of him and freed from the fear of this honor. Thereupon he called the eunuch and bade him go to his vizier without stay and delay, and command him to assemble the whole of the army, and cause them don their arms and armor and mount their steeds. So the eunuch carried the king's order to the minister, who straightway summoned the captains of the host and the lords of the realm, and bade them don the harness of derring do, and mount horse, and sally forth in battle array. Such was their case. But as regards the king, he sat a long while, conversing with the young prince, being pleased with his wise speech and good sense and fine breeding. And when it was daybreak, he returned to his palace, and seating himself on his throne, commanded his merry men to mount, and bade them saddle one of the best of the royal steeds with handsome selle and housings and trappings, and bring it to the prince. But the youth said, "O king, I will not mount horse till I come in view of the troops and review them." "Be it as thou wilt," replied the king. Then the two repaired to the parade ground, where the troops were drawn up, and the young prince looked upon them and noted their great number. After which the king cried out to them, saying, "Ho, all ye men! There is come to me a youth who seeketh my daughter in marriage, and in very sooth never have I seen a goodlier than he, no, nor a stouter of heart, nor a doughtier of arm, for he pretendeth that he can overcome you single-handed, and force you to flight, and that were ye 100,000 in number, yet for him would ye be but few. Now when he chargeth down on you, do ye receive him upon point of pike and sharp of sabre, for indeed he hath undertaken a mighty matter." Then quoth the king to the prince, "Up, O my son, and do thy devoir on them." Answered he, "O king, thou dealest not justly and fairly by me. How shall I go forth against them, seeing that I am afoot and the man be mounted?" The king retorted, "I bade thee mount, and thou refusest. But choose thou which of my horses thou wilt." Then he said, "Not one of thy horses pleaseth me, and I will ride none but that on which I came." Asked the king, "And where is thy horse?" "Atop of thy palace." "In what part of my palace?" "On the roof." Now when the king heard these words, he cried out on thee, "This is the first sign thou hast given of madness. How can the horse be on the roof? But we shall at once see if thou speak truth or lies." Then he turned to one of his chief officers and said to him, "Go to my palace and bring me what thou findest on the roof." So all the people marveled at the young prince's words, saying one to the other, "How can a horse come down the steps from the roof? Verily, this is a thing whose like we never heard." In the meantime, the king's messenger repaired to the palace and mounting to the roof found the horse standing there. And never had he looked on a handsomer. But when he drew near and examined it, he saw that it was made of ebony and ivory. Now the officer was accompanied by other high officers, who also looked on, and they laughed to one another, saying, "Was it of the like of this horse that the youth spake? We cannot deem him other than mad. However, we shall soon see the truth of his case." And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day and ceased to say her permitted say. That's a lovely story. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. At some point I had the feeling I'm actually on fire. There's a strange smell. Well, I'll take care of it. All right. It is Friday in Vienna. So I wish you a wonderful night, a happy weekend. For those amongst you who celebrate the equinox tomorrow, especially those from the Paris area and who celebrate Nowruz, basically, this is what we call it. Tomorrow is our new year. We start the new year with the beginning of spring, with the official spring, beginning of spring, because it was snowing here today. So happy Nowruz, Sole Noton Mubarak, and yeah, wishing you much love, even if you're not celebrating Nowruz. If you didn't like the 1st of January, you're more than welcome to celebrate tomorrow with us. All right, and as usual, remember to go inwards instead of outwards. I will see you next week. Much love.